This is the home stretch for the vehicle in my life. It is absolutely insane. You can ask Jarrett. This is truly off camera, one of the most insane periods of my life and his life as well. We are making massive progress. So there's just a shit ton of content. A lot of it's gonna be technical, a lot of it's gonna be situational. This is very technical. In my hand, I have the full function engineering's light secondary fuel rail. It's awesome, but it's not super functional without everything else that attaches to it. The most important thing, the little stubby 1700X ID injectors. You might recognize these. They used to be a lot fatter in my 3-rotor. Those purple things right there. What's so impressive about this rail is that this setup actually does not require those hats. It doesn't require any extra thing, so it's super compact. And with just the small amount of things that are included with the kit, you get a sick small setup. Again, if some of you guys start doing basic math in your head about doing E85 and this setup, you're gonna notice that it's woefully inadequate for 1,000 horsepower, which is a plan of mine someday. Very first thing, these little hats or bases go inside of the bosses for the injectors. That's required to get the correct diameter and make sure the O-rings seat. There's an O-ring inside of there, there's an O-ring outside of here, there's an O-ring here. The important thing is that you put your phone on silent when you're filming. The important thing is that you do not want fuel pressure coming out of this lower intake manifold and then igniting on the turbo. For example, we're gonna go to this one right here, which I've already set up, and you're gonna see that it is a super tight fit, just like me and Jarrett's mom. What you can see on the top side, a little bit easier, straightforward. Top side, of course, wants to play nice, and it goes in like that. O-ring does play with it a little bit, but you are good to go. Bottom one's not gonna be as pleasant, but we'll do this to both sides and then move on. So there's that, put it down, pop that in all the way. Take this other injector out. What you guys may notice is I actually ended up getting all the correct hardware for all the block-off plates. Mark, one of the guys that sent me one of the intake manifolds, actually included the whole set. And with a little bit of elbow grease, they cleaned up really nice. So, you've got something like this. Of course, don't hurt the dangerous business end of the injector, that's the bottom part. Be nice to those. Here are the stands that make this possible. I'm just simply going to hand tighten these for effect. And they weren't kidding, this is definitely lightweight. When you compare it to how fat the old style was, not that you're really gaining an insane amount of weight savings or anything like that, but space for sure. A lot more room to run things. So you can see how much further this rail has to go down. Those two have to be flush. So that lower O-ring is definitely not our friend. Just as telling Jarrett off camera, we're about to build some really cool shit. I need the world to know how cool this shit is. So I'm just dipping that in oil. It is clean oil. There we go. Out of there. So the bottom ones are certainly the ones that should be tight. When we go to pull the rail off, it's the top ones that are gonna stay. It is perfectly clean oil, by the way, otherwise I'd be clogging up the tip of the injector. Thankfully the injectors also aren't super sharp edges on the part right next to that O-ring, because in the past I would try and do that, and then wedging the O-ring would cut the O-ring, like slice it in like half, like thickness, and then you're screwed again. I'm really good at doing stuff that screws myself over. Bring this down, make sure it seems like it's meant to be brought down. That is going nowhere. You can run a serious amount of boost on this setup. Only limiting factor is this isn't a 4 secondary injector setup. So there you go, awesome. Lower intake manifold all set up, but how do we connect this to fuel? Well, let me show you what I got. Lunch. This hose, it's 3/8 record because sometimes this sort of stuff comes in really handy. This is for a 6AN line. This is 5/8, and that's for 10AN lines. These are both very good hoses. They're not like the super race versions, but my God, they work well on the 3-rotor, so stick with them. There's the primary fuel rail. This is still a confusing thing to ask for, is that you say, okay, you know, I want 6AN, and that generally to everybody means this side. But then you see this side, it's like, well, that's the same, but it's got an O-ring, so you'll say this is 6AN O-ring, 6AN normal. There's no name to it, just 6AN. The O-ring is actually designed into the full function fuel rail, so it's got its little sleeve there, awesome. Obviously tighten them up as we go. And then this is called a push lock fitting. Again, the correct terms, because I went to a place called G&J, and you've maybe seen it in other videos of ours, and they're old crusty guys. I was like, I'm not sure what the name of it, and he wouldn't help me. He was like, you're getting close. I'm like, you know what I mean. You know exactly what I mean, but they love to torture me. So this with oil, again in past videos with the 3-rotor, this is the correct size hose for this push fitting. You don't need to zip tie or use clamps or any of that sort of stuff. You get the outer part of the hose around this nice fitting, and God, it looks so good. Looks like you know what you're doing. This, of course, plugs in to there. I may swap some of these out for 90-degree angles. The primary fuel rail is down here, and we're gonna loop it from secondary to primary. And what you're seeing on the primary rail, it's gonna look like this inside the motor. I'm gonna loop it from here to here, and then you see this is a cap. This is literally just an AN fitting for future reference. That's an AN fitting with a cap. You might be saying, well, Rob, what the F are you doing? There's a whole rest of a word that goes after that letter, but I'm not gonna tell you guys what that then is. I never use it. Jesus. What the fuck? The whole point of this is that I want to make the Corvette system work with the rotary engine, and I'm curious to take it to the fullest level. That's curiosity killing me. So we're going to make this rotary engine work with a returnless system. So fuel line comes in, and it finishes at the engine. There is no return line back. We will, let me tell everybody that's groaning and everything, we will have a fully functioned fuel regulator one-to-one setup in the future. This is simply to say that the rotary engine is the better engine inside of the car. I can't make that claim if I'm using all aftermarket parts and it just ends up being a chassis. The fuel regulator on a Corvette, by the way, is actually built into the fuel filter in the back. Honestly, Corvettes are pretty impressive with their whole fuel system. There's a saddlebag tanks, and there's one that dumps into the other, and everything, all that magic happens back there. I'm not messing with any of that. So what that means to everybody watching is this fuel system will not rise equivalently with the boost pressure. So as this car boosts, which it won't be boosting hard, that's the point, differential fuel pressure will drop because boost pressure is rising, and inside of here, 55 PSI from the back isn't gonna cut it as much. But these fuel injectors are really good, and the adaptronic is really good. These are both testament to those sort of systems being so smart that somebody like me can't screw them up that easily. Let's follow this fuel system further along, and you'll see, starting here, we again have the push lock, or whatever you want to call this, quick EFI system. Thanks to AM's flex fuel sensor, we can convert this to 6AN. We're then going to connect the fuel pressure sensor for the ECU next to that, and then using one of these and push lock this to the secondary rail, we've got our whole fuel system right there. So pretty easy, pretty on the go sort of setup, especially in cities like this where you have a place that you can just run down and go, oh crap, I really wanted a 90-degree bend instead of straight. You've got options. That's such a luxury out here. The oil system is all really straightforward. 10 AN, 10 AN, 10 AN, 10 AN. So much bigger lines, two of them, one in, one out, done. Some of you may recognize this as welding wire. No, it's not wire that you weld to or anything weird like that. This is literally a ground cable with very, very fine strands. The electricity travels along the surface of wire, so the more strands, the more efficient, I guess you could call it, less voltage drop. Those are both 2-gauge wire. Reason why I'm going with 2-gauge at the moment is I think, again, the stock system, which is much smaller, is still undersized. And I also want to get away from these side mounts and just simple top mount, away we go. That will allow us to have the engine be the center of the power distribution. So if you see on my 3-rotor or even most properly done cars, it's kind of a star pattern. There's a spot where all the ground starts and then it all radiates out from there. In my case, it's directly on the engine and everything just comes from there. So I'll have a nice solid grounding strap back to the body of the car. I'll have power running to that same area because you have the alternator and the starter. It's gonna be much better starts because look at this. This is the starting wire. This is the alternator wire and then the starting wire from the stock Corvette. First of all, it's super brittle. But second of all, it's just, why do that? I'm gonna be running all of those wires nice and clean inside of here as well. Like I said, starter, alternator, battery, power block. We're about to take you on a journey that no man normally goes on. It is a place of insanity and chaos, where every single wire, a piece of copper, can mean life or death, the frying of a computer equipment, or the car running 1,000 horsepower. We're about to take you into the wiring zone. Well, this is primarily for myself. I'm just documenting everything that's going on with the LS engine harness because we do have to keep the PCM or ECU. So we have to keep it powered up and having some of the basic sensors for the engine so it doesn't error out. The reason for that is that way we can have a lot of the dash working and again, look more and more like a stock Corvette. Looking at all the sensors here, obviously we've got mass, airflow, and temperature both into there. I've got that. The controller motor for the drive-by-wire, we're gonna keep that. Oddly enough, coolant is down here. Alternator controlling and alternator power generation there. Away goes the evap, purge, ignition, all 4 of the injectors on this side, all that goes. Down here, we have the 2 heated O2 sensors, goodbye. This is the oil temp, pretty sure, yep, oil temp. NOx sensors, useless on a rotary. Grounds, of course, gotta keep those. Oil pressure, keeping. Air pressure, no, we're gonna take that out, don't need that for this thing. This is the camshaft, crankshaft, one of the 2, they're gone. Ignition and injectors on this side, all gone. The only one on the very end of this is the actual sensor for the drive-by-wire, so to measure just how far that throttle body is working. Down here, we again have 2 more heated O2 sensors, those are also going. But then we've got the starter signal wire and the starter power wire, as well as a crankshaft sensor, which is horrible. I'm surprised that didn't cause problems. That goes away. And then finally, an oil level sensor. I'm gonna take that out too. We'll gut this part of the harness all the way to here before it starts getting weird. Minimize that because we might use some of those sensors just to keep this happy. What's more important is that we're gonna start connecting into these things with the adaptronic. So it's gonna be kind of neat. It's gonna have kind of another one of these dongle looking things, maybe a little bit lighter, but we'll be able to connect in the adaptronic, get power to it, get signals from some of the sensors, which I don't think we really need, send signals to the car. For example, I think there's a white pin on here that is vehicle speed or wheel RPM, so that way the tach works. This, oh my god, this is all the controllers for the drive-by-wire. We'll deal with drive-by-wire after LS Fest, but that was actually more so because we couldn't get things cut in time. Transmission sensors, all those are staying and connecting to here because I think we can output VSS from this ECU into the rotary one. Again, we're gonna be gutting so much out of this. I'm gonna get right to it, so I'll come back to it when I have all of this plastic and tape off of the harness. Doing this in this order is very, very gratifying, especially when there's all these really wild colored wires. The only downside I came across is this. I don't know what sort of heat event occurred. I'm putting pressure on these wires and that whole thing is melted together. Not here, these wires are all fine there. You can really see where the heat held them all together. So this is surprisingly on top of this side of the engine. So that's pretty well stuck together. What I'm gonna do now, instead of continuing to take these smaller ones apart, is actually finish off the rest of this harness all the way back and then just cut all the injectors off, cut the ignition system off. I have to leave the very last one, of course. That's the drive-by-wire sensor. And then just de-thread, basically get rid of all the wires that I know are not needed from this way back. And if I run into a junction, obviously just trim it at the junction. That is going to simplify the wiring harness even further with knowing which sensors don't even need to be in here. Then, what'll be after that is start gutting a lot of these wires. I'm gonna share with you guys the trimming process because it's just so gratifying. So for example, right here is the NOx sensor, 1 and 2. Goodbye. Bring it in the pile of contempt and forlorn. Here are O2 sensors. Those are also getting trimmed. Before I do that again, make sure there's no ground. This one's oil pressure. We want to keep oil pressure. We like oil pressure. So now it's pruning the little injectors. Goodbye injector, goodbye injector. I took off the ignition one just a second ago, which is what made me want to make the video. Goodbye injector, goodbye injector. So this harness is thoroughly useless for an LS at this point. So now all I have left is controls for the alternator, coolant, drive-by-wire, oil pressure, oil temp. That's all that's left on this side. Going over here, oh hello, goodbye, goodbye. I wish I could just trim this whole side, but it's of course just right there. Drive-by-wire sensor. O2 sensors. There and there. Again, goodbye. Cam sensor. I don't have cams in my new car. Map sensor. I'm not gonna use the map sensor from this car. Goodbye. Oil level. That one, I think I'm gonna gut that one. So now I'm gonna take all of these wires and pull them all the way back. That definitely requires 2 hands. This step was way too much fun to not film. It's very gratifying that even though they're kind of stuck together for some of these reasons, oh my God, it's just a blast to rip them off. It's like peel away, except they're not damaging the wires. So all of these have to come back. I know that those are the knock sensors, but yeah, we're gonna really thin this. This part's getting really thinned out. It's just fun to just peel them. They're just super gratifying. Take it and then pull it back. That's it. That's all that's left in the engine bay for the harness. And I'm honestly gonna take that power line. Now it's way too small for the sort of power that my alternator kicks out and my starter needs. What really comes to light here is just how this thing's all divided up. Obviously that's the brain, those are signal lines. All these pink lines are actually switched power lines. On ignition on, these are lines that are powered, probably more than likely, hopefully fused, and life is good. So I'm gonna make those little short pigtails because we might need some of those to hook the injectors, to hook the ignition, and hook the new ECU into. Over here, you see one more piece really separate through the harness. The throttle control system for the drive-by-wire. It does send signals to the ECU and it does require power, so you actually see it going to the power needs and to the ECU. Obviously, the ECU needs power, but it's also sending things back to the car or getting signals from the transmission to the ECU. So that little pigtail right there is gonna stay pretty heavy for a while, but we're gonna start gutting that more and more. This might look a little janky, but I'm literally connecting the ECU back up to the car, leaving all of these switch power lines on. None of the sensors are plugged into any sensors, that's fine. But I wanna see what happens when I turn the car on. Now, I purposely, because of that one right there, purposely disconnected the fuse for the fuel pumps because all that's gonna happen is fuel's gonna dump out. Curious, once I ground, because there's no ground line for this right now, once I ground this and then connect the battery in, what messages am I gonna get differently than not having it in at all? All right, here is the first scary turn on. It's a big turn on to be scary. Of course, the car responds. That's as expected. There we go. So just had to push that connector in and get it all working. Little car, what are you gonna do with the ECU partially in? Just curious if it'll give me different information. So far, surface traction system. Same variety of messages. Yeah, of course. Low fuel. Actually, I'm kind of bummed out that it said low fuel. I don't know if this car actually has low fuel. This is gonna look really sketchy, but there's the ground for the ECU. I've plugged it in here and then have that just grounded to the chassis. So let's see if anything different happens, or if I fry something because it's wrong. We will see. Still Corvette. Reduced engine power, okay, I don't expect anything. Traction control. Ooh, look at down here. Yeah, we've got a gas tank. That is one step, oh, and battery voltage. That is one step closer right there. Oh, and yeah, it's not even telling me low fuel. We are definitely getting closer. This really hurts my soul to do it this way, but I'm gonna have to pull the ECU from the 3-rotor. Things got crazy with timing. It looks hilariously messy, and it is. Those lines are gonna be the power lines, which we're gonna splice into that brick on the Corvette, and then everything else is gonna come out of this mess and then go into that car. This is a 3-rotor, and you should get excited because that allows you to run a 3-rotor in a Corvette, but I'm only gonna use it for the 2-rotor at the moment. It's a pretty sad moment for me, but I'm cutting out the ECU power sources. Of course, I've got both sides labeled so that way I can remember exactly what needs to go in the Corvette and what needs to come back into this car. It's gonna be a really good chance to work on everything that I need to do to improve, because I've learned so much since I've started wiring. It's honestly a fun thing to do. Everything works on this car, that's the funny part. 100% functional, and has never actually been the problem while making 1,000 horsepower. But regardless, there's some things that could be cleaned up. Simpler
easier to prevent people from getting worried. That's probably the best part about it.
You've got to admit, for this being the world's most hated wiring harness, or at least one of the most hated, when you take it out of the car, it doesn't look so bad. It really doesn't, other than me not doing those conjoined circles, twins, and wrapping it, and double wrapping and adding wires just so it looks good. It looks pretty decent to me. I just didn't put it in a loom or didn't put it in anything to protect it. We're ready to go. This is gonna go into the Corvette. The pigtails with all the cables and call-outs on there, those are obviously gonna go to the fuse block. That's how much or how little it's gonna take to get this thing connected into the Corvette. This is one hell of an exciting process. I just depinned and cleaned up all the piggy wires that were all on the edge of the ECU. I then isolated the drive-by-wire system, take the TAC module out, just because we're not gonna do drive-by-wire at this exact moment, but I need all of it, because I will. Now I'm gonna do, I've labeled all of these, figured out which ones go to what fuses, and I've got 3 solid fuses for injection, ignition, well, the fuel pump's already done, and then other auxiliary things, accessories needed in the engine bay on the rotary engine. I'm gonna go to each of these sections, and they're all separated off right there, crimp them all together, crimp them to the power for injection, crimp them to the power for ignition, and so on. Really solid setup. I mean, obviously I can either choose to solder or crimp. Either one, you know, you'll hear people argue about all day. I'm not gonna worry about that part. It's gonna be a solid connection. It's not gonna cause problems. The rest of this harness, I'm gonna also probably hide back here until we figure out exactly how to make it work with this ECU. You know, that's having a gauge work, but yet having a messy engine bay is not gonna be cool. I'd rather have another gauge having funky, weird problems than have this whole thing just thrown across the engine bay. So right now what I'm gonna do is connect this harness to the actual rotary harness, and other than not having the engine in here right now, we can actually probably fire it up. There it is. What an absolute mess. And it is a thing of beauty. Right now I have these connectors, which are, I burnt them, but that's just the surface burn. They're really nice connectors. I bought them for cheap on Amazon. And what they are is they have glue inside of this part, and they have heat shrink. The connector is actually held on. It's glued on. You can see it right there. Pretty happy with that. So what I've done is turn the 3-rotor wiring harness to an adaptable harness that I could plug into the 3-rotor power or the Corvette, which of course at this point the Corvette. I got goofy because it's whatever 5 in the morning and bedazzled these wires so that way they stuck together, and these are the feed lines for these on this car. So right now at this moment I could plug in my Adaptronic. I don't have the motor in, but I have the Adaptronic connected in, and I could run the fans, at least just the low speed fans at the moment. Fuel pumps are gonna be a little bit of a challenge, but everything else would actually fire up, and this would tell the dash speed and so on. I do have to get a connection from the Adaptronic to the dash that says, hey, here's the TAC. But all in all, this is nuts. It's nuts, it's working. You guys know me, I can't just let it sit there. I'm too excited. I've got it hooked back up. I've got just a preliminary test fire. I do not have the Adaptronic connected in because I don't want to fry it with any sort of mistakes. It's 6, 7 in the morning. That harness is sitting aside and the grounds aren't hooked up, so it's not gonna really make contact with anything. But the important part is I've got more of the harness for that part working, so I wanna see if the dash gives me even better results. Fire the car up. I don't expect it to be completely error-free because there's stuff that you have to do with like HP tuners or whatever ECU configuration thing, but nonetheless, this is definitely a major step. Major step. I could, in theory, connect all those grounds up, have an engine in here, fire the car up with whatever functions that won't work. The hardcore part of it should. Let's make sure. Okay. That's a start as well. It's accessory mode, full mode. I don't hear anything blowing up yet. Surface traction system, okay. Reduced engine power, yep. Surface vehicle soon. It's gonna say low, yeah. Wait, low fuel. Wait, why did you say low fuel? Low brake fluid, yes. Okay, I'm still getting a lot of the same error messages, but it's so much better right now. I must have messed up the fuel sender. Oh, I didn't plug that one in all the way in. Okay, well, regardless, the car's fine. Those are all things I'll just have to play with as we go on. Things are looking good. Sorry, I just forgot that I didn't ground out the stock ECU. So one more run. Okay, fuel. Yeah, there we go. Reduced engine power, that's 1. Switch traction system. Active handling. Door jar. Should have low brake fluid. Yeah, I was gonna say that's empty. Wow, okay, this is good. This is really good. Minimizing the number of errors at all. Reduced engine power. You're gonna haunt me for the rest of my life. As long as you don't beep with that message, I think we can run the car fine. That was a brief journey into the wiring zone. That's the video. No, just kidding. With all of that, that was last night that we filmed that. It's a little out of order, but the point is, it all needs to get done. We have one more video of putting the engine in with the oil pan, with the front brace, with the wiring, with the adaptronic, with the stock ECU, with all the oil, with all of the fuel. That's tomorrow's videos, that blitz. And then we start the engine. And then we kill it somehow.